The pictures and stories from the Israel-Gaza conflict have been deeply troubling. The reason the world gets to see and hear them is because of the work of journalists who routinely put themselves in the line of fire. So what can be done to ensure their safety? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, war correspondents and their teams know that what they do is dangerous. Scores have been killed and wounded reporting from conflict zones. This is their story.
Over a dozen journalists have been killed since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Several others have been wounded. A handful more are missing or have been detained. One of the first casualties was Reuters video journalist Issam Abdallah, who was reporting from southern Lebanon.
Eyewitnesses at the scene said the shell that killed Issam came from Israel. I also reiterate my call to the Israeli Defense Forces for clarity regarding the terms of engagement in this conflict. And I urge all parties in this conflict to respect and work with all media to ensure the safety of journalists reporting in the region.
Under international humanitarian law, journalists are protected as non-combatants, similarly to civilians, but often this is not respected.
This is yet another example of the daily dangers journalists face in covering conflict throughout the world, and we do hope that there is an investigation as to exactly what happened.
The Council for Europe points out that in armed conflicts, journalists are often subject to deliberate attacks, kidnapping, and torture, and that the perpetrators are rarely brought to justice, creating a state of impunity. Something Abdullah's mother fears.
They don't want the truth to come out. They don't want their crimes to come out.
This report from CNN's Ibrahim Daman shows the level of danger and distress suffered not only by those on the ground, but also their families.
My son's terrified.
What will Ibrahim and others be made to sacrifice in the name of press freedom?
Well, let's meet our panel. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, we have TRT Correspondent Faten Elwan. In Camberley, in Surrey, Martin Smith, Senior Lecturer in Defence and International Affairs at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. And in Hereford in the UK, Stephen Smith, President and founder of SEPAR International. His company runs hostile environment training. And joining me in the studio, Shivani Jegarajah, a human rights barrister at Justitia Chambers. She initiated war crimes prosecutions in Geneva against former Sri Lankan army officers and represented journalists and media workers who were tortured and killed in Sri Lanka. Faten, I want to come to you first. Just talk us through your daily working life, how difficult it has been recently and the danger that you face on a daily basis.
Well, let's start that we, as journalists, are being stuck in the office, as most of the entrances between villages and cities are totally cut off by Israeli army blockage, and that movement is barely, like you're in a place where you have to choose whether to stay in the office and deliver the news or waste your time on the roads and deliver the news, but super late. So the way it's been going on, not just since the war in Gaza, but ever since 2015, there's no respect whatsoever to Palestinian journalists' rights on the street. The army will attack you, shoot you, threat you, no limits whatsoever. And this, what we saw during this war with several colleagues of mine, in which the Israeli army will come and cut off the air or start speaking in front of the camera, attacking them that they are lying or making up stories. So we decided to, whoever is in the base is in the base, in the field, and whoever is going to be in the office, going to be in the office. And thank God to technology and social media that now it's becoming even another way that we can concrete the Israeli obstacles that they are forcing on Palestinians. For instance, 2 days ago, we were covering the story at Bet El checkpoint, And the Israeli army just ran the journalist with tear gas, start shooting between their legs as if no respect whatsoever. We always gather in a place where we're totally separated from the demonstrations and the march. We gather as a group, we walk as a group, we talk as a group, and we breathe as a group. All the journalists. The scoop is not important. The safety of our life is what's important. And still, though we are clearly wearing our best, clearly saying press, clearly having the cameras in front of us, still no respect and no attack. Tonight, only 4 journalists were arrested in the West Bank. And the reason why they were arrested is what they call incitement on Facebook. And the incitement can be news that you posted, or a picture that you shared, or a story that you told, which is only the reality of what's happening on the ground.
Faten, very powerful words. Martin, how vital is it that journalists like Faten and all of her colleagues are there in zones of conflict to report what's happening, to tell the world what's happening?
I think absolutely indispensable, particularly when you have such contentious, such a polarizing and such a deep-seated conflict as that between Israel and armed Palestinian groups. And I think the fact, paradoxically, the fact that it is extremely dangerous for journalists and media representatives in those sorts of environments on both sides, because both sides in the current struggle, in particular, the current aspect of the Israel-Palestinian dispute in particular, see themselves as being locked in literally an existential war. They see it as being a battle for survival. And the extra risk that journalists run is of being seen as being unfair, being biased, or even as being agents of the other side. So at one and the same time, it is exceptionally dangerous, but also for anybody who is interested in trying to form at least a reasonably fair and balanced and accurate picture as to what exactly is going on, and equally importantly, why it's happening, and the views and the agendas of all the parties to the dispute. It's absolutely indispensable that they are there and that they carry on doing their job, albeit in the most trying and difficult and sometimes dangerous of circumstances.
Shivani, is this quite a deliberate policy by the Israeli administration to harass journalists, make life too difficult for them, and to basically suppress information?
I can't talk about the issue of intention. And I just, speaking as a human rights lawyer, I want to make one thing clear. It's not for journalists to make a decision or to make an investigation or reach any conclusions on whether or not a particular party has committed a war crime. The duty of the journalist is, as independently as possible, to simply report on the facts. So whether it's Hamas or Israel who has committed war crimes or any other breaches of the Rome Statute, it is a misconception by the Israelis to believe that any news report is actually, a conclusive investigation into war crimes. It's the ICC who do that, okay? And in terms of the ICC, if we look at Shireen Abu Akleh's case, who I believe has worked with the lady on the left, her case is absolutely emblematic, okay? Because she was reporting on the 11th of May on Jenin. It wasn't a case where there was a great deal of crossfire. She was very clearly wearing and identifying herself as a journalist. I mean, it said blue on her flak jacket, it said press. On top of that, she was a journalist who was known very well for 25 years, and she was also a dual national. She was also an American citizen. So when the killing took place, initially, this is just what I've studied so far in terms of the ICC case. I'm not talking about news reports. But when the killing took place, initially the Israeli government said that it was crossfire. Then they had to backtrack from that and say, no, clearly the bullets were Israeli issued and it was a killing, but it was a mistake. So I think this goes back to your question about intention. okay, the question of intention, that is something, when we look at prosecutions and the law covering journalists, is journalists have such a fundamental role in terms of providing the raw data on the ground in order for the ICC investigations to take place. Now, in terms of the ICC, Palestine became an observer state in 2015, which was, quite a remarkable success. And it was due to a lot of very successful lobbying. And in 2021, the official prosecutor agreed to investigate war crimes on both sides. And then everyone had to make way for Ukraine. So there was an investigation, and then straight away the arrest warrants were issued for Putin, if you remember. So everything relating to Palestine just went on a backtrack. But the mandate is that every alleged, and we're talking about allegations here, and that's really important to say because it's actually for the ICC and other UN bodies to investigate. But these are all credible allegations. And when you come to something like genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes, sometimes you have to say, if you have a bombing of a hospital, you need to make sure you've got data from every side of that hospital. You need to identify who in the chain of command had committed those acts. So, for example, there might be a difference between someone who's a commander, because there is no justification for that. If you're a commander and there are human rights abuses that take place, you just have to take the hit. But if you're a low-level soldier, you're taking orders, it's a different question. If we don't have journalists, let's take an example of the hospital, in every area of that hospital who can take information from witnesses, from families, from victims, okay, and people who can identify who may have been involved, what they've seen, what type of, aircraft was used, then the ICC investigators, who are, I have to say, ruthlessly independent and go on to, do their own investigations, that's the starting point. It's not the end point, but that's their starting point for their data. So Shireen's case, I say Shireen, but I posted about this when she was killed because I was so shocked that there hadn't been an immediate reaction. It is shocking that if she's an emblematic case of the shooting of one of the most high-profile, Al Jazeera took the case to ICC.
We'll talk more about Shireen's case in a moment.
And
Stephen, I want to come to you. You run what are called in the industry HEFAT courses, hostile environment first aid training courses for journalists, reporters, photographers and camera crews. Just talk us through what you teach people on your courses and the level of preparedness you can try and give them for heading into conflict zones.
Yes, so what we try to do is offer what we call a holistic approach. And so we have the physical security, we have the digital security, and we also have what's known as psychosocial care. Also, we touch on things like law and also about how we go into a situation as a journalist and think about our safety in terms of neutrality, and also about how we can improve that safety. And there's other projects that we're involved with, for instance, where we'll get involved with members of the government, security forces, and have forums with journalists, across the spectrum, and discuss about, the protection of journalists, the right of journalists, etc. And so the big thing that everyone really wants is first aid training. So that's quite a lot of the course. It's very hands-on, it's very practical. And then what we do during and at the end of the course, the journalists are put through a number of quite realistic and dare I say it, stressful situations, to kind of use the equipment that they have. It can be minimal equipment, and think about how they can look after each other, particularly if someone gets shot, blown up, or there's a car accident, something like that. The digital situation is really important. It's a thing that's been growing over the years, and the war that's happening at the moment is testament to that, particularly where it comes to things like deep fakes, misinformation, mistranslation is a big thing that we're seeing at the moment. And we've got a course starting next week, and that's something we're going to be talking about quite a lot. And then the psychosocial aspect. And, the CPJ at the moment has said a minimum of 19 journalists have been killed. The majority of them are Palestinian. But obviously these journalists have been operating for years in this kind of environment. There's the psychosocial toll on these individuals, the legacy, if you like, and how that's managed, or in most cases it isn't. So what we try to do is introduce a methodology, and from there, where other organisations as well, like the one I just mentioned, have systems in place where people can reach out and hopefully get some more in-depth sort of support.
Thanks, Stephen. Faten, in your experience, can any course truly prepare journalists and crews for going into somewhere like Gaza, going into the occupied West Bank?
We already lost 15 journalists in Gaza, and we have a few of them missing until now, in which we don't have any information about. Those were bombed, like their bodies were split into pieces, like every single Palestinian in Gaza Strip. And let me tell you about personally, I took all the courses for safety. I went to London, I took the safety course. I went to the United States, I take the safety course. But let me tell you about the 3 times I got shot. In the 3 times I got shot was the first time in 2005, when I was on the way to cover a demonstration in Ramallah. And there was a checkpoint, a well-known checkpoint, in which there was clashes on it. And my cameraman was coming from the other side, and I'm still on the other side, but I have my gear on me. I didn't have my vest and my hat, but I had my logo, my microphone, and a vest that says I'm a journalist. And then a soldier came up to me from across the street. He held up the gun up to me, and he said, "You're a journalist?" I said, "Yes." And it was the first time that I encountered such a situation, because they taught me at school. I was a fresh graduate. They told me at school that I'm protected only if I wear my gear. And I said, he asked me, "You're a journalist?" And I said, "Yes, I'm a journalist." And he said, "Oh, okay." So he held up his gun up. 3 times he held it up and put it down. And I was just waving my microphone to make it clear that I'm a journalist. And like the 3rd time, he just shot me in my leg. Simple as that. This is how you can never be prepared to be in a place where no law is respected by the Israeli forces. 2nd time, same thing. I was in Nablus covering an invasion over there, and I was wearing my gear. It was super calm. Things calmed down, and I was ready to take off my, we ended the coverage. The Israeli soldier, like the tanks pulled out and everything. And then the soldier came and asked me if I finished, because I need to wrap up. And I just was taking off my flat jacket. I said, "Yeah, I just finished." And he said, like, "Okay, great." And he just shot me. And I got 2 bullets, one in my hand and one in my, like in my back. And which is like, what exactly what exactly kind of safety can you take in a place that there is 0 respect to you as a journalist, 0 respect to you as a human being, and 0 respect to anything? Like they have like a carte blanche into doing whatever they want, because they're well known of being the sacred cow, that no one can hold them accountable or judge them or take them to court, in which I raised a court case against them. And I didn't win it because the answer was, well, our soldiers does not, they don't go to questioning. And this is exactly what happened with my friend, my very close friend, a family member, Shireen Abu Aqle, who she got shot in a cold blood for no reason. And just after a year and something, today there was a statement that, yeah, maybe our forces shot Shireen, but we're not going to investigate with any of them or blame any of them.
Faten,
so this is the big slogan that
Faten,
is raised in here.
Thank you. Martin, these are horrific stories. What do they tell us about the Israeli administration's view of journalists and the media reporting on what their soldiers are doing?
I think they tell us, and I think, to be fair, this applies equivalently to Hamas as well in the context of the current Gaza conflict. They tell us, I think, that instinctively journalists are not seen as neutral, and they're not treated as civilians, because your colleague a second ago said that she was taught at school that she had to wear her gear and emblematic symbols in order to gain protection. Under international humanitarian law, on the law of armed conflict, all civilians and non-combatants should be regarded inherently as protected personnel because they're not taking part in the combat. So I think it tells us that journalists are not regarded as being neutral. Civilians, they are regarded as being protagonists. They are regarded as being biased. They are regarded in some cases, as I said earlier, as being agents of the other side. And I think, as I say, in fairness, although we don't know, simply because it's very hard, certainly in Gaza, to obtain interviews with Hamas fighters and Hamas leaders. But given the nature of Hamas in terms of its view of the struggle and the conflict, also seen as being literally existential, I think it very likely that when it comes to journalists, that Hamas will have a similar view to that which is displayed by the Israeli armed forces. And I think all of it goes back fundamentally to the nature of the conflict. It's so deep, it's so protracted, and it is viewed as being, it's so polarizing, and it is viewed on both sides as being fundamentally existential. It is a matter of life and death.
How does this trouble you, hearing what Faten said? She's a journalist doing her job, and she has been shot 3 times on 3 separate occasions.
You know, we as a community inevitably think of the 2009 genocide when Tamils in former guerrilla-held territories were required to go into the no-fire zones, and then they were shelled, and thousands died. So I think it comes down to this, and I think it's quite straightforward. There are 2 issues here. One is that in Sri Lanka, the war crimes campaigns where we lobbied the UNHRC, that only happened after everyone was killed, okay? I mean, so if you look at the LTT, that was a non-state organisation but also held a quasi-state, there couldn't be an effective investigation of the LTT because they were all killed or they were all interned, okay? So me as a lawyer trying to work out how this is all going to work, that the key word here is accountability. It's absolutely fundamental.
But there doesn't seem to be any here. These Israeli soldiers are shooting journalists, as we've just heard.
No,
that's the allegation.
That's right.
And there's no accountability.
That's right. So because Israel has signed but not ratified the Rome Statute, because they don't accept the legitimacy of the ICC, actually Palestine did apply successfully in 2015, and actually they said that they are open to be investigated for war crimes. It's not actually the same. But in terms of Israel, unless there is going to be immediate action in the way we saw arrest warrants for Putin, we know that there has been no internal investigation, as we know. I mean, it's amazingly brave woman here. He tried to take the Israeli Defense Forces to court. If you don't have an internal, you're supposed to, there can't be an international investigation if there is an internal investigation. So the starting point in all of this is you're required to have an internal investigation. So if you look at Britain, for example, where there have been allegations of war crimes, those were ongoing at the High Court. So the British Army were aware that, you know, there are consequences to their actions. I don't know what happened in the US, but if there are no consequences to the actions, in fact, the government says that the Israeli soldiers are war heroes. So any investigation is actually quite insulting.
Stephen, I want to come to you and ask about the need for mental health support after journalists have been in conflict zones. Is that something you think there should be more of within media organisations?
Absolutely. And with that, it has to be contextualised. What I mean by that is, take your Palestinian journalists. If you're going to have trauma psychologists, psychosocial practitioners, they should be from Palestine. They should understand how these people hurt, how these people think, you know, the cultural nuances, things like that. It's always important to get the right people to do the right job. And also to understand a couple of things. First of all, that it's not like a 30-minute fix. You know, for some journalists, it may be for the rest of their lives. And secondly, it's about getting those journalists to actually engage in that. There'll be people that don't want to do it because they'll feel that it might threaten their livelihood or their credibility. Also, for some people, they find it very painful. And so, you know, it's a good organizational culture in your bureaus and your media houses to basically talk about it, to check in with each other and encourage it, and be a good friend, be a good work colleague. If you see someone struggling, then encourage them and be there for them.
Thank you, Stephen. Faten, my final question to you. How do you cope mentally? How do you keep going, doing what you do in the line of danger where you are?
We don't have time to think. That question is always like making me laugh, because like we're in a place where it's like a non-stop 24/7 trauma after trauma after trauma. Just yesterday, my friend was calling me at 1 o'clock in the morning, telling me, I'm worried about you. And I said, like, hey, don't worry about it. We don't have time for this. So yes, we know that we're traumatized, but we are like on a condition of a non-stop trauma after trauma. I don't know who will be able to deal with the kind of like like things we see on the ground. And the problem is not just what you see, is like not having time to start with to process what you see. How do I deal with it? Honestly, I don't have time to deal with it. So we just keep on going, keep on going, keep on going until, as my friend said yesterday, you're going to have a heart attack one day and die, or you're going to explode and it's going to be bad.
Faten,
and I had to agree with her.
Thank you so much, Faten, for all your courageous reporting and for making the time to join us on Roundtable. Thank you to all of our panel. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But from now, from me and Brady and all of the team here in London, goodbye and thank you for watching.